you might pay, a few $1,000s, 2 or 3 thousand for a clinical placement. And that might seem like a lot, but at least if you do that, you're avoiding a $17,000 loss by semester. And we see even schools, Joseph, I don't even know if I had a chance to tell you this. We see some schools offer classes once a year. So if you take an incomplete, you are now stuck in the same place for one full year. That opportunity cost is 40 grand, $50,000 to just stay there.
All right, welcome to the FitBucks podcast. Today we got special episode focused on nurse practitioners and the nuances that we see there, all the way from a student to post-graduation, from student loans, financial planning, finding a job, career, salary. So I'm looking forward to this series. Joining me is Chris from MP Hub. I'll let Chris, you can go ahead and introduce MP Hub. I would try, but I can't do it the same justice that you can. So Chris, welcome to the show.
Hey man, thank you so much for having me today. Yeah, at NP Hub, we are the leading organization for supporting nurse practitioners for clinical placements. And so we're helping these students get clinical placements so they can graduate on time, get licensed so they can go to practice. And then we also help our students and nurse practitioners get jobs on the market because we've launched our brand new platform called NP Hire.
It was great to meet you. If you guys reached out a few months ago, those of you that don't know, we have the Facebook group for NPs, and we see these problems all the time, trying to get preceptors, trying to get jobs. And, the fact that you guys are right there to help, it's fantastic. So, with that said, let's jump right into that. Finding preceptors, the hidden cost in not finding one, the delayed gratification. I know you guys have put out articles on this. Give
Yeah.
us some background on that and what those numbers, look like from your guys' calculations and how you go about figuring out those numbers when you're doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, if you take a step back, right, nurse practitioner, they're an RN for usually anywhere from 2 to 7 years of experience to go back to school. And so the first thing you want to do the minute you're in school is graduate, right? That's the only thing on your mind, right? Got to get to graduation, get out of school, and go get a job. And so these students right now on the market, in the US especially, are not are having to find clinical placements by themselves, right? And so this is a grueling task we're putting our healthcare professionals through, and it's honestly it's absurd, and that's one of the reasons I started the company back in 2017. So you have students begging, borrow, and pleading for clinical sites. Most students need 4 or 5 placements to graduate, and because of that, it's incredibly hard to find 4 different places to say yes to you. And so what ends up happening often is, students may find a site, they don't really know the site well, just someone might have said yes to them on Facebook. And then when they follow up to kind of get the credentialing and the paperwork done, well, there'll be a breakdown in the market, or there'll be a breakdown, and the preceptor might say, oh, hey, I'm busy now, I can't take you anymore. And so we see this every day of these students having to sit out a semester, sitting out 2 semesters. And so the cost of that is brutal because a typical RN is making about 80 to 90,000 on the, as a nurse, right? And that's sort of at usually a 5-year maturity point. Now it could be a little bit more if they're doing travel nursing, maybe a 100,000 or so, or it could be a little less depending on the role. And so the minute they graduate as a nurse practitioner, depending on your market, we see starting pays anywhere at 120 or above. And so especially if you're in a specific type, we see urology, adult gerontology nurse practitioners coming out of the gate making a 160.
Yep.
Psych mental health nurse practitioners usually starting in 120 to 135. And so it does depend a bit on specialty, but if you think about the average NP salary at 120,000 and your typical RN salary at 80,000, that's a $40,000 increase you have just by graduating, getting licensed, passing your boards, and getting your first job. And so when a student delays their graduation by 3 months, you divide that 40,000 by 3. I'm sorry, by 4 because it's 3 months out of the year, and you're getting something like $14,000 right? So that's the obvious. Oh, hey, my salary would go up, but there's also other costs there too because often when you take an incomplete university, you need to re-enroll, pay for new textbooks or books. Maybe there's additional, and this is a very hidden cost, additional student debt loan interest.
Yep.
And so you're down, basically, there's a cost to just staying in motion, like staying still instead of being in motion. And so one thing we always tell our students is if it comes down to, hey, you can either pay for a clinical placement. Maybe you have a friend or a network. And as long as you know the site is quality, they're going to teach you well. You might pay, a few $1,000s, 2 or 3 thousand for a clinical placement. And that might seem like a lot, but at least if you do that, you're avoiding a $17,000 loss by semester. And we see even schools, Joseph, I don't even know if I had a chance to tell you this. We see some schools offer classes once a year. So if you take an incomplete, you are now stuck in the same place for one full year. That opportunity cost is 40 grand, $50,000 to just stay there. Not to mention the moral implication of it, right? You want to get done with school.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's all. It's a big cost. And, leading up to this like podcast, I was like, I'm going to have some fun with our technology at FitBooks. Those of you that are listening for the first time and don't know, we have basically financial planning software that we use for everybody in healthcare and everybody in general. But I went in and I said, okay, based on these explicit costs, I want to run some financial simulations over the long run. Like, what does it mean? Because it's not just explicit costs that cost you today, right? When you're like, if you don't graduate,
Yeah.
but that's lost investment. That's lost time paying off student loan debt, less time paying off credit card debt, whatever it is, like you could be doing something with that money. So there's a long-term effect too. And a calculation that we developed based on that income level that you talked about, like, because income levels change, right? Based on location, based on setting, every month that was missed in terms of not graduating came out between $15,000 and $35,000 that it costs you in the long run, like in the long run. And so, for example, when you were talking about, you might not be able to take this class again, you might get delayed graduation by a year. That's 12 months. I mean, in the long run, that could potentially cost you like $400,000 based on lost investments, based on lost time to paying off credit card or student loan debt and whatnot, or even mortgage debt. I know a lot of NPs have mortgages. Like, you're not paying that off fast either, like, because that lost income that you referred to, that $40,000 difference, that's gone, right? So every month that goes by, you could be reinvesting that. So big deal from a financial standpoint. So I definitely, that's why I always look at the trade-offs, because like you said, if it's $2,000, $3,000, I find a preceptor, I'm like, well, great. Every month that I don't, it's costing me 10 to 30 grand. Now, there's a nice trade-off there, right? So, definitely that's a big thing that we see now. Um, we're going to start talking about like career and salary stuff, but as students, I want them to be understanding the difference between like 1099 versus W-2s, and the combination of both. Like, when you guys are doing your stuff through MP Hire, what do you guys see in terms of like the 1099 jobs, W-2 jobs, the breakdown on that? Can you just give some of the students some insight on that?
Yeah. So for employers are generally willing and happy to hire you as 1099s or W-2s. Now, the biggest thing is you actually, as a nurse practitioner on the market, one of the big things we always talk about at NP Hub is this mindset transition, right? As an RN, you are a cost on the balance sheet, right? If you're in a hospital, you're a cost of providing the care to patients. But as a nurse practitioner, you're not. You are now a provider. You are revenue generating. And so for many providers, when they hit the market, one of the key things they have to realize is, well, the conversations shift, because when you go to a practice, you're costing the practice, but they are earning revenue off you. They're earning money off of you. And
Yeah.
so if you want to be structured as a 1099 and say you have your own entity, like maybe you start a company, maybe your name is Sally Smith and it's Sally Smith LLC, and that's okay. And so, for Sally, she can actually be hired as a 1099 if she wants to, because 1099s get better. They can take advantage of more tax incentives.
Yep.
But if you are a W-2, it will be easier for you to tend to get a mortgage. And so it really depends on kind of where you are in your career, because as a nurse practitioner, you have more power in the job market. It's not a one size fits all. And so you can go into a practice and start off as a W-2, maybe because you want to get that mortgage in a few years, and then negotiate with your employer and let them know, hey, I have my house. Maybe now I really prefer to be a 1099 because maybe you also have a, NPs are always have a second or third job somewhere, right? Maybe your second or third job is doing home visits or home health. And so in that case, you're driving a lot. And so maybe you can then buy a car and write off your full car amount in year one. And so you can take a big tax savings that way. And so it really just depends on the nurse practitioner what their goals are.
Yeah, no, and we'll talk about the home buying stuff a little bit later on too, like with the 1099. We'll touch on, what all that means and go into more details. Um, but it's big that like the W-2 versus 1099. I was just talking with one of my wife's friends in the medical industry, and she's like, "Yeah, I'm thinking about going 1099. Why should I do it?" And I was like, "Look, like you're a business at that point, so literally everything you do can be written off in terms of loans." And I'll give you an example. She, I don't want to give out too much because she watches the podcast all the time and a lot of her friends do. So I don't want to give out her personal information, but she had to take a personal loan to do some stuff for a quote unquote business. But she took it out in her personal name. Well, when you do that, the interest on that personal loan is not tax deductible. But if you're 1099 and you have it set up through an LLC and it's a business expense, then it's a business loan and that interest is deductible. Like, so there's so many different things you can do when you're 1099. And now I'm not saying that's for everybody, but just know the differences, like, and what your options are. Um, Even on the group today on Facebook, I saw someone saying like they haven't had a job, in 6 months since graduation. And it's like, well, what jobs are you looking for? And she's only been looking at W-2 jobs. It's like, well, why not 1099 jobs? And she's like, well, what's the difference? And it was like, these are
Yeah.
the things as a student to potentially start looking into. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, go
And,
ahead.
and a lot of times, sometimes people think 1099 jobs are more risky or they are part-time. And those aren't true.
Yeah.
That's just a it's a fallacy. And
Yeah.
so it's important to do your due diligence there because you could get a great full-time 1099 gig and it's fantastic. You could do also the same as a W-2. Oftentimes 1099s actually might earn a little bit more money because instead of the healthcare cost, so W-2s, right, for the employer, for anyone who is on the employee side of the equation, for an employer, the cost of hiring a W-2 is usually anywhere from 1.2 to 1.4 times your salary. And that's because state government, federal government, and Social Security benefits, the employer has to pay quite a bit. And so sometimes even what we see and what I've talked to some nurse practitioner entrepreneurs is they'll come in and they'll say, look, if you hire me as a W-2, I might earn easy math, let's say 100,000. But to you, it's going to cost you 125,000 to have me. Instead, let's split that difference. And why not? I'll come in as a 1099 and you pay me 115.
Yeah,
Employer
absolutely.
wins, you win, you're earning more money, employer wins. And yeah, there's more management involved there. But if you do have a good CPA, which might cost you 2 or 3,000 a year, they can, in my experience, a good CPA is worth their money in a weight in gold. And so you just have to
Yeah.
find a good CPA.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the show notes, or if you're watching on YouTube, in the description of this video, I'll drop a link in. We have a blog article that actually walks through that, like the mathematics of what you just talked about, where it's like, hey, like this is what you get for a W-2. What's that employer realistically having to pay for that? And how do you negotiate that? Because there's even like time and a half involved, like all this stuff that you can add in there to make yourself get paid more. Now on the other side of that, you have to pay some of those taxes and whatnot, but that's what you have to go through. And I'll put a link to that. We're also gonna, it's not out yet, but we're actually doing an entire video series on being a 1099. So, definitely keep an eye out for all that because it's definitely a good way to go. Now, the other route that I see, just to put the nail on, one last point, put the nail in the coffin on the 1099 stuff before we move on, is you have to look at it, like, are you married as well? Okay. Because your spouse might have a W-2 job with fantastic benefits. So it's like in that case, if you go get a W-2 job, you don't need the benefits. So you're basically missing out on like an employer sitting there telling you, we'll pay you for this, but you don't need it. And so that's saving them like 10, 15, 20 grand a year, 30 grand a year potentially. Well, it's like if you go in and say, well, I'm a 1099 independent contractor, you can get paid that. And again, you don't need the benefits because your spouse has it.
100%.
So this is how you can mix and match. And, when we're working, with couples and building out financial plans with them, that's one of the biggest things that we see. And a lot of times they didn't even realize that was an option. And all of a sudden, on a per year basis, they bump their net cash flow up by like 10, 20, 30% because they make that switch. So it can
Yeah,
be pretty dramatic. Okay.
100%.
Yep.
And who's not a nurse listening to this, the same conversation applies. I mean, I've
Yep.
had people in my company ask for the same thing.
Hmm.
Makes
All the
we,
time.
we do it all the time because it is a it is no usually very little preference to the employer.
One other topic, because there's some actually a couple other topics I want to hit on, but one of the things that I see that I don't have really an answer for, especially when it comes to MPs, is because everybody's so different. And so
Mhm.
this answer is different for everyone. I want to see what your take is on this, is getting your first job right. Like that's so critical in my opinion. And especially as a student, you should be looking at that job. I mean, what insight can you add on that and making sure that, hey, this first job that I am getting, this is what I really want to do. This is what I love doing. And this is the perfect job.
That's a really good question. And so on NP Hire, so we have this new platform now. It's the only nurse practitioner. It's the only platform for nurse practitioners on the job market. There's not a single platform dedicated for NPs. And when you think about how they're one of the fastest growing employers, healthcare providers in the US, that is a grave mistake. And so one thing we focused on is really creating more transparency between the employer-employee relationship. Because there's a lot of opaqueness there. There's a lot of, well, we don't want to tell them the salary. Employers will tell us, we don't want to tell them the salary at the jump. And I'm like, well, do you want to waste your time interviewing people for the wrong role? Like, no, like then put your salary there. It's fine. Employees are saying, well, hey, I don't want to ask for this. Or candidates on the market are saying, I don't want to ask for this. It's like, well, do you want to go down this path and find a new job in 6 months? Because you're going
Yeah.
to be miserable there. And so I think it's really important that you ask some of those fundamental questions and you do research on the benefits people are offering. Benefits can be negotiated. And most importantly, benefits are a huge plus, between PTO, 401k match, CME assistance, right? Almost every employer will pay for a NP's CME allowance. Almost every single one. And so a lot of times you compound that to a conference in a fun city, and now you have yourself a mini vacation with learning. And so one of the big things to answer your question very directly is look at reviews for that employer. Ask them what their onboarding process is. You are a new nurse practitioner. There's no expectation for you to be great on day one. We know everyone knows that, but you will be great in about a year or two. Right. And so how do they help you get there in 6 months? How do they help your first 3 months of transition? And I think that's a massive question to ask. And it also shows that you're thinking long term with the employer.
Yep,
It's,
absolutely. And that's big right now, by the way, with long term, because the turn and the turnover
oh,
is massive. And
you want to
we
hear a
touched
crazy
on,
stat I learned?
yeah, what was
23% of nurse practitioners leave their first job in under 2 years.
mm-hmm. Yeah,
But
it's not uncommon.
for employers, it takes them sometimes 6 months to a year to hire for one person. And so
Yeah, six to 12 months, and then there's ramp up time. That's the inefficiency that I mean, in a former life, one of my jobs was actually valuing employees
hmm,
from big companies. And what we'd have to do is say, like, per employee that leaves, what's the cost of rehire? And that's
yeah,
how you back solve into the valuation for tax purposes and whatnot. And I mean, it's expensive. And if they hire you, first of all, it takes 6 to 12 months to hire someone, and then it takes you, 12 months to ramp them up. That entire 18 to 24 months, you're losing money as a business in that turn, like, and basically in that inefficiency. So yeah, like, it's you want to keep your employees essentially, at least at good employers, they do.
100%.
Um,
It is
yeah.
so costly to, and especially if you're in a specialized role as a nurse practitioner, you're a urology nurse practitioner, ENT NPs. I've not seen an ENT NP earning under $210,000. And it's because it's so hard to find them. And so there's only like 10,000, 5,000 of them out there in the US. And so if you have a good relationship with your employer and you're in a hot specialty, psych mental health, something in the acute settings, which are hard to fill, that is a great place for you to start saying, okay, they want me here. They're valuable. I know I'm valuable here. And you can negotiate more.
Yep, absolutely. On that too, you brought up some of the benefits, and we'll use that to start talking about some of these different financial topics. First one that comes to mind, because I see this a lot again in the Facebook group you have, is about student loans. Do you see, from your standpoint, because we could talk about student loans all day long, but from an employer standpoint, do you see any employers paying student loans, reimbursing on student loans, like as an employee benefit? Because there are some new programs out there, but we have not seen a lot of that yet. I mean, from your guys' end, have you guys starting to see a little bit more of that in terms of jobs that are being posted and whatnot?
So we aren't seeing many employers provide student loan reimbursement.
Yep.
That is not common. One of the things we have our employers do in order to onboard to our platform and post a job is they have to list out the benefits they offer. And so almost exclusively, everyone's offering Matt, parental leave, Matt or Pat,
Yep.
CME reimbursement. Almost everyone is offering that. So that's why I say if you're not getting it, you're not taking advantage of it, it's absolutely something that should be on the table.
Yeah.
Uh, long-term, short-term disability, of course, healthcare, of course, medical, dental, vision, all that. But nothing on the student loan side.
Yeah. So basically from a high level, I'll touch on student loans, then from an NP standpoint, how do you actually repay them? Like there's a lot of different options, first and foremost. With federal student loans, there's like 9 repayment options right now. What you have to understand from a financial planning aspect is that there's 2 strategies, payoff strategies or loan forgiveness strategies. Okay. And payoff, you're trying to pay them off as fast as you can, and you're going to look at refinancing your student loans. Loan forgiveness is where you're going on it for 20 or 25 years. Your payments are based as a percentage of your income. Um, and you basically get your loans forgiven in 20 or 25 years, but there's a tax at the end of it that you got to save for. Now with NPs, because your salary is, pretty decent and high, most people don't use loan forgiveness for that purpose. Most of the
Yeah.
people on loan forgiveness are working at a nonprofit or public service loan forgiveness. And that is 10 years and it is forgiven and there's no tax. However, you have to be very, very careful because one, your income might push you to a place where it doesn't make any sense to go on it, or your payment might be so high that you get kicked off the plan. Like, so there's very specific things you have to do. Plus, if you get married, now there's dual incomes. There's a lot of different things that you got to dig in there. What I really encourage you guys is don't just look at your student loans in isolation, because you should be looking at your entire financial plan, because what you do with this part of your student loans can affect your retirement. It can affect home buying, and it can affect everything else that you're doing. And if you go down this one route and 2 years later, you realize that you went the wrong route and you switch, it can literally cost you tens of thousands of dollars on your student loans because you used the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And it can become a major headache. So making sure you're going down the right strategy and all those pieces, it's instrumental to put that all into a financial plan. I know, for example, there's people out on the internet that are just like, we'll do student loan help for you and pay us, $600 or $700, and we'll help you choose which plan. It's like you can't just choose a plan based on the student loan numbers. You got to look at everything. Um, so we see that all the time because it's just like, yeah, 2 years ago I went to this, I paid this person $700. They said to go on this plan. I was like, well, that was good at that time, but you knew you were getting married, for example. You knew you were getting to buy a house. Like they didn't talk about that. They're like, no.
Yeah.
Or like they put me on an income driven repayment plan and told me to file separately. And it's like, okay, well, you contributed to a Roth IRA directly. You can't do that anymore. You have to do what's called a backdoor Roth IRA. So there's other things involved there.
Mhm.
Um, so make sure that you're getting help. Of course, I'm biased. You should be getting help from us, but even if it's not from us, like make sure that you're getting help with student loans, looking at the entire picture. Other financial topic that we see a lot of is like investments, employer matching, that type of stuff. What have you guys typically seen in terms of like 401k matching or 403b matching or whatever it may be? What do you guys typically see in the job offerings that you guys see?
401k matching, very standard that we're seeing. Not really much on the 403Bs. And on the 401k, usually matching I would say about 80% of the employers are providing matching. Almost all should. And so I think that is I'm sure we're going to see that creep up. And so if they're matching, it's usually anywhere between 2 and 4%.
Now, home buying. This is where, I mean, we touched on it, earlier about 1099, W-2, all this type of stuff. There's actually something in the mortgage industry that a lot of NPs are not aware of. And it's because of the name of this mortgage. It's called a physician mortgage loan. And actually, a lot of companies have been switching it and they say it's the professional mortgage loan or like physician and medical professionals home loans. So there's different names for this type of mortgage, but NPs qualify for it. Okay, and it's different because the rates sometimes are typically higher than your typical mortgage, but they don't have insurance on them. So like if you use like a 10% down type of mortgage or a first time home buyer's mortgage, you're paying insurance on those. On these, there's no insurance. Okay. Not only that, but you can potentially get up to 100% financing. Depending on like if, for example, I know some NPs that are married to MDs. MDs can get 100% financing on these. If you're not in that situation and you're an NP, they can do like 3% down up to $850,000, some companies, 5% down up to $1 million in a loan. And so they're different leeway. You can use them to buy multi-unit properties. There's other features on them too, like you said earlier, 1099 jobs. Most employers or most mortgages will require you to have a 1099 tax return for 2 years. Okay.
Mm.
And it's based on adjusted gross income. With some of the companies that we've seen, specifically some that we work with, they will do it like if you had that 1099 job for 5 months, 6 months, or if you have a contract that specifically states it and you just started a month ago, they will still give you the loan. And so the thing about the professional mortgage loan or the medical professional loan or the physician's mortgage loan, whatever you want to call it, every lender kind of has their own sets of rules on what they will underwrite versus what they don't. So you might go to one and they might say, no, you don't qualify, but this other lender might. The company that we typically use is called Neo Home Loans. They basically specialize in those medical professional loans. And they are fantastic. But I see MPs all the time say, I got denied for a loan because like the 1099 stuff that we brought up previously, so on and so forth. But this is also why you need to develop that financial plan.
Mm.
What we see on the back end is sometimes then they get too much loan, especially, I grew up in the Bay Area up in California. So the cost of living there is ridiculous. And I would see people all the time, they get into a mortgage and then they're living paycheck to paycheck because it's just too much mortgage for them in their financial situation. And in fact, we did a poll with all healthcare workers that we work with that bought in 2020 and 2021. And it was something like 60% regretted buying a house because it was too much for them financially to handle.
Oh,
And they
wow.
weren't ready to buy it yet. And it was like, that's when I was just telling my wife, I was like, one of the biggest things that unnerves me is like, of course we had the financial planning platform, the software, the experts and stuff that were here. And oftentimes people will go to their mortgage brokers or real estate agents, buy the house, and then they schedule the call with us to update their financial plan. It's like, no, 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 you should be doing that before.
Yeah.
Like, make sure you're getting everything ordered, then get the house, and then schedule again once you know the final numbers. Like, so don't wait to get help when it comes to all these things, the student loans, the investment stuff, the home buying. It's it's very important. I mean, from your guys' standpoint, from those financial topics, I mean, what do you see or any other questions that you typically see from people that you guys work with?
Well, I think one of the big ones is the wrong decision on it sort of mirrors each other. The wrong decision on kind of how you get your first job, your second job, those first like maybe few jobs you get, right? Because you do have NPs. NPs do tend to switch jobs more often than other professionals. And so I think it's also because you're not always matching with the right job. And so you get unhappy. You're there for a few months, honeymoon period. Then it's sort of like, there's a meme on Instagram that you kind of see like everything's amazing. And you're like, oh, this company's okay. And then like, wow, this place is a dumpster fire. And so once a lot of places you realize it might be, not a place for you, you tend to leave. And so you're constantly jumping there. And so two big things. If you're moving jobs, you should generally, because of how costly it is, time intensive and risky, because you can move to a job and lose that job. And then now you might have a mortgage of 4,000, 5,000 a month, which is a lot. But
Yep.
if you are risking to getting a new job, you should be receiving more income. And so every time you move a job, you should aim for at least a 10 to 15% raise, 100% of the time, always.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't tell you how many times, because obviously we get a lot of phone calls from people that, that we are having their financial plan, that we build it with them. And then they're coming to us because they want to roll over their 401ks or their 403bs, whatever it may be, because they left the job. Okay. So we see that all the time. And then it's amazing because we see 3 to 6 months later, they'll be like, I'm looking again because I hate this new job. Like that whole grass is greener somewhere else, right? And then it's like, well, my old job was actually, I should have just stayed there. And it's like, so make sure you guys do, it's not just about the pay raise, but make sure you do your homework and
Yep.
make sure you're not just doing it for the income. I say this all the time, especially to healthcare professionals, right? Like, nobody went to school to become an NP or any other type of healthcare specialty to be like, I can't wait to repay student loans, or I can't wait to repay my mortgage, or I can't wait to buy a big house because I want to do yard work, right? But then what ends up happening is I will talk to someone that will be saying, look, I took this job, but I didn't really want it, or I switched jobs because I needed more income. And I say, well, why? Why is that more income important? And they'll say something like, well, I have these student loans I got to repay. It's like, well, now you're making money in student loans dictate your life. That's not why you went to school. You went to school because you wanted to help people. Like, make sure that job is doing that. And then we can make sure that the financial situation complements that, right? Because then you're going to be happy. And at the end of the day, if you're not happy where you're working, I don't care how much money you're going to make, you're going to burn out and you're going to hate it. Like it's one of those things and you want to enjoy where you're working at. So, with that said, Chris, thanks for coming on. Is there any other last words of wisdom you want to throw out there? I know we touched on a lot. So any other things you want to throw out there for everyone?
I think, um, that first job you get, it might take a little bit extra time. Just be patient with it and make sure you're evaluating the employer. And if you're looking for more information on employers, you know, like I said, we just launched this new platform, NP Hire. Recommend you check it out. And hopefully it'll help you find your next role.